Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the game Among Us. If you've been living under a rock and have no clue what I'm talking about, Among Us is a game where 10 crewmates live on a spaceship. The catch is, one of them is an imposter, and the imposter's job is to kill off each crewmate without being caught. On the other hand, the crewmates must complete their tasks while trying to find the imposter and not get killed. It's a pretty fun game, but I never thought the Among Us game would happen to me in real life. When I was 16 years old, something terrible happened to the kids in my class, and that's when I found out there was a real-life imposter in my class. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you do, you will become a beast at Among Us. Trust me, it really works. I grew up in a really rural area. There wasn't much around. The closest city was hours away, and my neighborhood was really small. I knew everyone, and everyone knew me. My class was also very small, with only 9 kids in total, including my best friend, Jeremy. Jeremy and I had grown up together since we were practically fetuses, as our moms were best friends too. Jeremy and I did everything together, and he was more like a brother than a friend. School was pretty much normal. We had assignments, did work, got detention, you know, the usual stuff. Jeremy and I stuck through it all together, and I was so glad to have him as my best friend because he made such boring things become a lot more fun. Not much happened in our town. There wasn't much crime because everyone knew each other, and that would be like stealing from your own family. It just didn't make sense. But it could also get quite mundane. With only 9 kids in my class, there wasn't much drama to get excited about or fights to feel anxious about. Sometimes I wished something exciting would happen, but I should have never made such a careless wish. One day, a new student came to our class. The teacher introduced her as Abigail, and she looked like a really shy girl. I was also slightly creeped out by her. She always seemed to be staring at me, and it was almost like she never blinked. Her eyes had bags under them, and she was also wearing quite raggy clothes. I looked away as she sat down, and I made a face at Jeremy. Jeremy chuckled. He understood how I felt. Abigail was a weird kid. For a few weeks, nothing significant happened at school. We just continued our studies, except we had a new kid among us. She didn't speak much in class. She pretty much kept to herself, but then something happened that changed everything. One of my other friends, Michael, didn't turn up for class suddenly. When our names were called in the morning, his voice was absent. I was surprised. As far as I was concerned, Michael had never missed a day of school. He was quite academic and wanted perfect attendance at school. One time, he tried to come after he had just had surgery the day before, but his parents, as well as the school principal, managed to persuade him not to come if they marked him as present anyway. You can imagine my shock when Michael wasn't in class. Was he sick? Something terrible must have happened to him to make him miss school. "Jeremy, where's Michael?" I whispered to Jeremy while the teacher was still calling names. "I don't know," replied Jeremy. He looked concerned. "Should we go to his house and see what's wrong?" I asked. "Sure, let's go after school," he replied. Once school ended, we went straight over to Michael's house. Like I said, we knew everyone in this town. It wasn't hard finding Michael's house. When we arrived, the door was already slightly ajar. I peered in and was shocked to find 2 policemen were already there. I knocked on the door. Michael's mom appeared, looking stressed. "Luke, what is it?" she said to me. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Johnson," I replied. "We were just wondering if Michael is all right." Michael's mom closed her eyes, and to my horror, I discovered that she was crying. "Michael is missing," she said after a while. I looked at Jeremy with wide eyes. "Missing?" asked Jeremy in shock. Michael's mom nodded. "Since this morning. The police are here. Have you any news about his disappearance? Do you know where he could be?" I shook my head regretfully. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, I don't. I hope you find him soon." Michael's mom looked down in disappointment. "That's okay, Luke. Thank you." She closed the door and Jeremy and I walked away. We were so shocked by this sudden turn of events that we hardly spoke on the walk home. The next day at school, Michael was still missing. At school, we set up a notice board for anyone who might have had any info on where Michael had disappeared to, but no one knew a thing. It was as if he vanished out of thin air. Now, if there had only been that one disappearance, I may have been able to move on. Sure, it was absolutely terrible that Michael was missing, but I was willing to move on with my life. That is, until the next victim turned up. It had been a week since Michael's disappearance. We were sitting in class waiting for the students to fill in, but I noticed that there were only 8 kids. I realized that Emily was missing. "Mr. Layson, Emily isn't here. I raised my hand and told the teacher. Mr. Layson looked around, and I thought I saw fear flash across his eyes. I see, he said nervously. Then he called someone on the phone, and I noticed that his eyes had widened. I felt my stomach plummet with terror. Surely Emily wasn't missing too, right? Maybe she was just sick. She had to be. This didn't make any sense. At that point, Abigail, that new kid I told you about, entered the room. There was something about her that made me terrified. I don't know whether it was the blank stare or her strange appearance, but she gave me the heebie-jeebies. I made sure I stayed away from her for the rest of the day. Unfortunately, my fears were confirmed. Emily had disappeared. She had left her house that morning to walk to school, but she must have disappeared on the way there because she never made it to school. The public was going crazy. They were getting really mad at the police too. First Michael, now Emily. Something big was going on here. Meanwhile, I was getting really suspicious of Abigail. It seemed too coincidental that she turned up at our school, and suddenly 2 students went missing. I was super sus of her, and I really believed she had something to do with it. I decided to talk to Jeremy about my suspicions. I think Abigail may have something to do with Michael and Emily's disappearance, I said to Jeremy while he was over at my house one evening. Really? He said. Why? It seems like too much of a coincidence that Abigail suddenly turns up and 2 students go missing, you know what I mean? I was scared Jeremy would start thinking I was a freak, but to my relief, he agreed with me. Luke, I've been thinking the exact same thing, he said. I think we should investigate it more, figure out if Abigail is behind all this. I honestly think there's an imposter in our class. I felt my blood run cold. This was starting to get really scary, but I nodded my head anyways, and we made a plan to spy on Abigail. The next day, we followed her home from school. Her house was actually very close to my house, which scared me even more. She entered her home, and soon she was gone. Jeremy and I waited outside, hiding behind some bushes. And then Jeremy suggested we sneak into the garden and take a peek through the window. I didn't want to do it because what if we got caught? But Jeremy eventually persuaded me, and before long, I found myself in the new kid's garden, peeping through her downstairs window. What I saw made my jaw drop. Abigail was in the living room, and she was holding something in her hands. And I remembered what that something was. Emily's backpack. That's right, Abigail was holding Emily's backpack. Emily, the one who was missing. I recognized it because it was bright green and had stickers on it. I would recognize Emily's backpack anywhere. I was never so sure of something in my life by that point. I truly believed Abigail was the imposter, the one who was behind these kids' disappearances. I motioned to Jeremy and we fled the scene before we were caught spying. I told Jeremy about what I saw and he looked terrified. We didn't know what we should do next though. Should we go straight to the police? I thought that it may be wiser to wait and see if we could catch Abigail red-handed. After all, we didn't want to tell the police if Abigail could get away free of charge. We needed to make sure she would be arrested for sure, and so we waited. Big mistake. The next day at school, 4 kids were missing. Crazy, right? There were only 4 of us left in class. Me, Jeremy, Abigail, and this one other kid whom I didn't know that well. I was practically shaking with fear. I kept looking at Abigail thinking she was going to lunge at me or something and attack me, but she seemed surprisingly calm. Mr. Layson looked very concerned. We ended up getting let out of school early and we were told to head straight home for our own safety. The thing was, I didn't want to walk home. Abigail lived very close to me, and what if she ambushed me while I was walking home? I didn't want to disappear like Michael and Emily and the others, and so I asked Jeremy if I could stay over at his house that night, and thankfully he let me. We arrived at Jeremy's house and headed to his room. We were sitting in there for a while talking about our suspicions of Abigail and how we might catch her, when I heard a noise come from downstairs. It sounded like shouting or something. What was that? I asked. What? Replied Jeremy. It sounded like it came from the basement. Don't worry about it, he said. I was sort of worried. What was that noise? Jeremy suddenly stood up and said he needed to go to the bathroom. While he left, I decided to investigate the strange noises. I went downstairs, making sure to step on my tippy toes so Jeremy didn't hear me from the bathroom. I went over to the basement door and headed down the staircase. The noises were a lot louder now, and I was sure someone was shouting. When I made it down, I turned the light on. What I saw shocked me to my core. There was a cage, a huge cage, and inside were all the missing students. Emily, Michael, all the others. They were all locked in this cage like prisoners. In my best friend's basement. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be hallucinating. This didn't make any sense. Why would they be in Jeremy's basement? And that's when it hit me. Jeremy was the imposter. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me and Jeremy appeared. "So, you found out," said Jeremy. He had some rope in his hands. "Jeremy?" I stammered. Suddenly, Jeremy lunged forward and grabbed me, tying me up with the rope. Jeremy tied me to a chair, and despite my protests, I was now trapped. "Why, Jeremy, why?" I yelled. I couldn't believe it. Jeremy had kidnapped all these poor kids, but why? Why do it? None of this made any sense. I had known Jeremy my whole life, and I would never have expected this of him. So it wasn't Abigail, but then why had Abigail had Emily's backpack? Then something happened that turned my world upside down. Red lights started flashing in the basement, and a speaker was turned on. A voice spoke through the speaker. "And that is the end of the Among Us game show Student Edition," said the voice. Suddenly, a man dressed in a suit, as well as some cameramen, came into the basement. "It looks like Jeremy has won the game," the man said into his microphone. "Yes!" Jeremy pumped his fists into the air. I was so stunned. I didn't know what to think. But then Jeremy glanced at me and smiled apologetically. "Sorry about that, Luke," he said. "What is going on?" I yelled. And that's when Jeremy explained everything. The whole thing had been part of the game show. Michael's disappearance, Emily's disappearance, the others going missing. It had all been part of this game show that had taken place. Everyone was in on it, the parents, the teachers, even the police. The only people that had no idea were myself and the students in my class. Jeremy had been contacted by the game show and had been told to play as the imposter, kidnapping these students and hiding them in his basement. If he managed to fool everyone and win, he would get a grand prize of $1 million. But what about Abigail? I asked in shock. She had Emily's backpack. "Oh, I planted that there," said Jeremy. "You never suspected it was me. Thanks, Luke. But don't worry, I'll share the cash prize with you. You deserve it." And that concludes my story. I had a real-life imposter in my class, and things did not turn out how I expected them to be. What do you think? Would you have been able to figure out the imposter if you were in my shoes? Comment your thoughts down below.
Hi, I'm Dahlia. My life was pretty much normal until my family and I made the huge mistake of playing an Among Us game. It completely ruined my family, to the point where my mom and dad don't speak to each other anymore. If you're wondering how it came down to that, stay tuned until the end of the video. Just like any other kid when Among Us boomed, I played it a ton with my friends. We'd have so much fun, and I really loved being the imposter and winning games. I was especially good at being a detective too. And my friends would always say I was so big-brained whenever I cracked the case on who the imposter was. But before I go on, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more awesome stories. Naturally, I wanted my family to play with me too to see how they would do at the game. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, but I have 7 other siblings. Crazy, right? There's Dixie, Dario, Daisy, Dylan, Dipper, Dee, and the youngest, Bob. You're probably wondering why everyone except Bob has a name starting with D. But supposedly my parents got so fed up by the time they had Bob that they just couldn't be bothered to think of another name beginning with D. Anyways, one day I asked my family to come play a game of Among Us together, and we all got ready in the living room. It was also perfect since there were 10 of us, so we could have a full game. We got our phones out, sat on the couch together, but positioned ourselves so we couldn't see each other's screens and cheat. And we also all wore earphones, so no one could hear us doing our tasks or hear any of us kill someone either. The first game was pretty funny. No one really knew how to play the game, so it was mostly just a bunch of us goofing around and having fun. But then, eventually my family started to actually get good at the game, and we managed to have some pretty wild and intense games. Like one time it came down to a 50-50 with 3 people left, myself, Dixie, and Bob. Dixie was saying that Bob had killed in front of her, while Bob said Dixie had killed in front of him. I wasn't sure who it was, but when I looked at Dixie, I immediately knew it was her. Don't tell her this. Although, if she sees this video, she'll probably find out anyways. Sorry, Dixie. But Dixie has a tell whenever she lies. She always scratches her earlobe, and she was doing it then. I voted off Dixie, and we won the game. Then came another intense 1 versus 2 game. I was the imposter this time, and I was trying to convince my mom that Dad had killed someone. Dad tried to defend himself and say it was actually me who had been killed. But then Mom just suddenly voted for Dad, and the crewmates lost the game. I was happy since I had won as an imposter, but then I froze because suddenly Mom and Dad were arguing. "You never trust me," yelled Dad. He was red in the face. "Of course I don't trust you," replied Mom quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means." "Mom, Dad, why are you fighting? It's just a game of Among Us. Don't take it seriously." "You made us lose the game," Dad yelled at Mom again. "You deserved it," Mom yelled back. "Sarah, not in front of the kids. Come on," replied Dad sternly. "Don't Sarah me. Ugh, I can't deal with you. That's it. I'm moving out." "What?" My siblings and I all screamed at once. "Sarah," Dad said in shock, "don't do this. I've had enough. I won't let you treat me like this anymore. We're through. I'm filing for divorce." And with those last words, my mom went upstairs to her bedroom and started filling up a bag with her things. My siblings and I immediately asked Dad what was wrong, but he wouldn't say anything. He just stormed outside and took off in his car to vent out. My siblings and I had no idea what to do. Why had Mom and Dad started fighting all of a sudden? How could a game of Among Us have ruined my family so quickly? It didn't make any sense. I told you I was a good detective, right? Well, I couldn't seem to figure out the mystery of this case. It was just a game. Surely Mom and Dad wouldn't have been so butthurt over that. They were logical people. "Who will we live with?" asked Dylan. "I don't know. How can we choose between Mom and Dad?" asked Dee Dee. "Maybe Mom is just joking," I said. "She'll probably come back down and say it was all a prank, right?" But she didn't. Well, she came back downstairs, but not to say it was a prank. She came back down with her bag of belongings and her car keys. When she saw all of us gathered in the living room, she looked sad. "I'm sorry, my darlings," she said, "but I just don't love your father anymore. I'm moving out. I already have an apartment ready." "But Mom," I said in surprise, "it was just a game. I'm sure Dad was just a little angry because of the game." But Mom just smiled sadly and walked away. "You can choose who you want to live with," she called over as she left. "My apartment isn't as big as this house, but it's your choice." At the end, my siblings decided to flip a coin. We felt sorry for both of them and didn't want to leave them on their own. I ended up living with my dad, with 3 of my other siblings, while 4 others went to live with Mom. It was so weird being separated like this, especially since it was so sudden. Every day after Mom moved out, I wished I could have turned back time to stop us from playing the Among Us game that ruined my family. The worst thing was, Mom and Dad both tried to pretend nothing had happened. They acted like everyone was just perfect, when it so clearly wasn't. And neither of them wanted to talk about the fact that they had divorced over an Among Us game either. It was ridiculous. I also missed living with all of my siblings. It was great having so many brothers and sisters. But now that half of them were gone, I was a little lonely. And of course I missed my mom. Sure, Dad was great, but of course a daughter's gonna miss her mom. Life was pretty miserable, and I decided it was stupid for my parents to have separated over a game of Among Us. And so I made a plan with my siblings to get my parents back together. First, we had to somehow get them at the same house. My mom and dad weren't speaking at all, so that was going to be tricky. To do that, Dixie had the bright idea to tell Mom that she had left some stuff at the house, and she needed to come back to pick them up. Dixie told Mom that Dad was out at work when, in fact, she was lying. Dad was at home. We weren't sure Mom would take the bait, but sure enough, she came over with a bag, ready to grab the stuff she had supposedly left behind. When Mom entered the house, however, she was shocked to find all of her children gathered in the living room again. Dad was upstairs and had no clue what we were planning. "Mom, please take a seat," I said. Mom seemed so confused, but she could tell we were all serious, so she took a seat. "What's going on?" she asked. "One moment," I said formally. Then I ran upstairs quickly and dragged Dad down into the living room. "Dahlia, what are you—" said Dad, but then froze as he saw Mom was there. "Sarah, why are you here?" "I believe our children tricked me," said Mom coldly. I forced Dad onto the couch, and then I explained everything. "Look, we just can't accept that you two are separated. And over an Among Us game? Seriously? And so to resolve your issues, We have decided there's no better way than to have another game of Among Us to prove to you that you still love each other, and a silly game shouldn't be able to break you up. Mom and Dad had their mouths open and were staring in shock. Wait, you think we broke up because of that Among Us game? Said Mom in disbelief. Honey, that's not why we broke up, said Dad. I hesitated. Wait, it isn't? Then why? But the rest of my sentence was snatched away when I heard the door open. I did a quick head count of the room and confirmed there were 10 of us here. So, who was the stranger coming into our house? We were all sort of frozen as we waited for the newcomer to enter the living room. And when she did, let me tell you, it was not who we would have imagined. It was my science teacher. My hot science teacher. She was pretty young, like only 25 years old or something. And all the guys in my class were pretty much in love with her. She was so beautiful too, and I could see why they liked her. But what was she doing here at my dad's house? It wasn't like we'd invited her. Miss Barry? I cried out in surprise. What are you doing here? Miss Barry looked just as shocked as we were. I'm looking for Harold? Then she spotted my dad in the living room and smiled. Sweetie pie! She squealed. And then she rushed forward and hugged my dad and then kissed him on the mouth. My siblings stared in horror. Miss Barry, that's my father, I exclaimed. He is? She asked in confusion. Wait, then she looked at my mom, who had turned away in disgust. Dahlia, this is why your father and I divorced, said Mom sadly. Wait, said Miss Barry. Harold, you're married? And you have kids? My dad looked so uncomfortable. Well, you see, suddenly Mom shot up and bolted out of the house crying. I ran after her and tried to comfort her. Your dad cheated on me, Dahlia. I saw them at the restaurant kissing. When I confronted him, he tried to pretend that I was hallucinating and that I was the one at fault. That's why we divorced, she explained. I thought it was because of the Among Us game, I said. Mom laughed bitterly. No, darling. We wouldn't have divorced over something silly like that. Mom said she was going home, and I agreed. I went back inside the house to find that Miss Barry was yelling at my dad in fury. You lied to me! You said you were single! Yelled Miss Barry. You never would have found out if you hadn't come here, replied my dad. How did you even know where I live? I Googled it, said Miss Barry. Harold, this is unacceptable. She started to sound like a teacher again. I can't be with you anymore. I feel disgusted now that I know you cheated on your wife with me. That's it. We're over. Then Miss Barry turned to me. Where's your mother? I must apologize immediately. She left, I said. I wasn't sure how I felt about my science teacher anymore. Oh, please tell her I wanted to speak with her. I'm so sorry, said Miss Barry. I nodded, and then Miss Barry left. Meanwhile, my siblings and I all turned towards my father in anger. Dad, how could you do this? We yelled. I'm sorry, he said weakly. Well, we had had enough of him too. We all stormed out and headed to our mom's place, leaving my dad alone. Once we got to Mom's place, we immediately comforted her and told her we wouldn't leave her alone. We were all furious with Dad. I decided I needed revenge on my father. I wouldn't let him treat my mom terribly and then walk away without any kind of punishment. Sure, Miss Barry had broken up with him, so now he was completely alone. But I felt like that wasn't enough, and so I devised a plan. The next morning, my siblings all got ready and set up the apartment for the plan. Mom had called Dad to tell him she was willing to talk to him at her apartment, and he was going to arrive there soon. It was all part of the plan. Soon we heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, and then the door opened. Dad entered, and then he let out a huge scream. All of us were lying on the floor covered in blood. My dad screamed and screamed. It looked like a crime scene. My dad put his hand to his mouth and started to tremble in shock. Then suddenly Miss Barry jumped out of the closet and scared him. She started laughing maniacally. Now that your family is gone, we can finally be together, she yelled. Sweetie, you did this? Asked Dad in shock. Yes, come on, Harold, let's run away together. No, this is insane. My dad started to back away, and then he took off running. Miss Barry laughed again as he ran away. Then she turned to us. The plan worked perfectly, she said. Us corpses stood up. This ketchup looks a lot like blood. Nice idea, Dahlia, said Bob. Thanks. The plan sure did work well. Who knew Among Us in real life could be so scary? I said. Thanks for helping, Miss Barry. No worries. It's the least I can do, she said. You see, I had called Miss Barry to see if she would be part of our prank, and she had immediately said yes. Mom walked over to the window and looked at my dad, who was still running. I should call him, tell him we are all okay and it's just a prank, said Mom. I still think we were too harsh on him. Oh, I think he got what he deserved, said Miss Barry. She walked up to my mom and smiled, and Mom smiled back. We all walked up to the window and watched as my dad ran for his life.
If you've ever been annoyed by your older siblings, imagine having 5. Yes, 5. My name is Oliver, and I was born with 5 faces staring right at me, or at least that's what I was told. My sisters are identical quintuplets, and they're 4 years older than me. Before I continue my story, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on any great content, you can also hit that notification bell. I wasn't sure why my parents decided to have me after having 5 girls. After all, kids aren't cheap. But they sure made a fuss over me. They'd always wanted a boy, and they were happy when they finally got one. This didn't mean that everyone forgot about my sisters. I mean, quintuplets are quite rare, and my sisters are very charming. On the day of their birth, they were all over the news. The media made a huge fuss over them, and when they were finally taken home from the hospital, thousands of people had left gifts at our doorstep. The girls remained well known throughout our state and were always receiving offers to act in advertisements and sometimes even movies and sitcoms. Even when I was born, the news headline was, "Quintuplet sisters welcome baby brother to the world." It's always been all about them. But because I was the baby of the family, I was treated like a prince. In other words, my childhood was perfect. I got anything I asked for, and I never had to do any chores. While I was growing up, my sisters were also very nice to me. They had all rhyming names: Casey, Stacy, Jacy, Macy, and Lacey. And I'm not sure if this was my parents' idea of a practical joke. They dressed the same way and wanted to do everything together, so you can imagine that it was very easy to mix them up. To avoid any confusion, I just called all of them sis. I loved them, and I was pretty sure they loved me too. I always had someone to talk to, and I was never, ever lonely. This all began to change during our annual family vacation last year. We lived in a luxury high-rise apartment in the middle of the city. It was a concrete jungle there, so every vacation we'd go somewhere we could enjoy nature. My parents rented an amazing cabin in the mountains and planned a whole bunch of stuff for us to do. The one I was looking forward to the most was bungee jumping. We literally had to beg my parents to allow it, and they eventually agreed. I couldn't wait for that day. When the day finally arrived, my parents drove us to the location. I looked around and realized that the jump would be more thrilling than I expected. I could barely see the river below. That's how far up we were. 2 of my sisters went first. Then, when it was my turn, I got strapped up and took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3, inhale, exhale. Then, as I was about to jump, a huge man grabbed my arm so tightly I thought it would break right off. "Oh my gosh," he said. "Ouch, why did you grab me?" I said. "Your cord isn't attached, buddy. You should thank me for saving your life," he replied. I realized that I nearly jumped to my death. I didn't understand this at all because just a few seconds before jumping, I checked and everything was attached just fine. After that, I was too scared to jump and I didn't bother. When we got back to the cabin that night, I had a shower, and while walking to my room, I heard my sisters talking. "I can't believe you messed this up. You were supposed to prevent anyone from seeing that the cord was detached." "This isn't my fault." "Yes, it is." I wasn't sure who was saying what, but I was totally shocked. One of my sisters had detached my cord. Did they want me to die? But why? I went to my room and locked the door. I didn't know what to do or what to even think. I tried to avoid them for the rest of the trip. When we got back to our apartment, I thought I should talk to my parents about what happened. I barged into their room one night after dinner. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious," I said. "What's the matter?" my mom asked. "I think my sisters are trying to kill me," I responded. They looked at each other, shocked, then started laughing. "What on earth would make you think something so silly?" my dad asked. After I explained what happened, they tried to convince me that it was all in my imagination. Maybe I thought the cord had been attached and it hadn't. Maybe I was so shocked from the experience that I heard incorrectly when I was standing outside of my sister's room. That night, I began to consider that maybe my parents were right. But that didn't last very long. As I sat on my bed thinking, my stomach began hurting like crazy. It wasn't an ordinary stomachache. I felt like there were prickles lining my stomach and that every time I breathed, they pushed into my skin a little deeper. That's the best way I can describe it. "Mom! Mom!" I screamed. My mom came to my room right away. "Mom, something is wrong. I'm in a lot of pain. Call an ambulance," I said. Then I blacked out. I don't remember anything that happened after that. I don't know how many hours later I woke up, but for a while I could hear everything that was going on around me. I tried really hard, but I couldn't open my eyes. "Do you think it was enough? Did you put the whole bottle like I told you?" "No, I only put half of it in his drink." "You were supposed to use the whole bottle." "Ugh, you messed up again. I don't think you will die." They were my sisters, and again, I didn't know who was saying what because I couldn't open my eyes. It was obvious that they poured a poisonous substance in my drink at dinner time. But why? When I was eventually able to open my eyes, they had all left and only my mom was there. She was sitting on a chair looking at her cell phone. "Mom, what's wrong with me?" I asked. "Oh, my baby, you're up. The doctor said it's severe food poisoning, but I don't understand." "We all ate the same food and we're all fine," she said. "Mom, I think my sisters put something in my drink. I heard them talking about it earlier. They're trying to kill me," I said. There, honey. You couldn't have possibly heard that. You weren't even awake. You must have been dreaming," she replied. I tried to explain that even though I couldn't open my eyes, I was wide awake and I was sure about what I heard. She didn't care. When I was ready to be released from the hospital, I was extremely scared. I didn't want to go home because I didn't know what my sisters would have in store for me next. But I had no choice. I just had to try my best to avoid them. I'd often go to the roof of our apartment building because I loved the view and just staring at it helped me to forget all of my fears and negative thoughts. About a week passed and my sisters hadn't tried anything new. I was sitting enjoying the view on the roof one evening when all of my sisters appeared behind me. "We have him now," Stacy said. "Don't mess up this time," said Casey. "What's going on? I don't understand why you are all trying to kill me. I've been a good brother to you," I said while getting up and looking around for an escape. "You've been an annoying brat, and I think that Mom and Dad already have enough children. They don't need you as well. They never did. You were a mistake, and we're going to get rid of you," Stacy said. "This doesn't make any sense, Stacy. We're almost adults. In a few years, we won't even be living with Mom and Dad anymore. I don't think you need to kill me to get rid of me. After we leave home, I promise you'll never see me again. Just don't kill me, please," I pleaded. Stacy came towards me. I backed away slowly. "Please, stop," I said. "No, we are not messing up again this time," Stacy replied. "He's already on the edge of the building. Just push him off," Macy said. "Never mind. I will just save you the trouble and jump," I said. I pretended like I was going to jump. They were frozen in shock, and I used this to my advantage. I ran quickly towards the steps and shot down as quickly as I could. I don't know how I ran down so many flights of stairs. I guess fear has a way of making you more powerful than you ever thought you were. When I got downstairs, I ran outside and flagged a taxi. I asked the taxi driver to take me to the nearest police station. Then, I recorded a video with my phone explaining how my sisters had been trying to kill me for days and how my parents weren't taking me seriously. I uploaded this video to my social media and also sent it to a popular news company. If my parents wouldn't take me seriously, then the whole world would. When I got to the police station, I explained my problem to the police. "Wait, you're the brother of those quintuplet girls," a very pretty policewoman said. Yeah, they're the ones trying to kill me," I replied. "OMG, can we take a selfie with you? Can we meet your sisters?" she said. I was angry and baffled. They weren't taking me seriously at all. I stormed outside and sat on the steps. I felt hopeless. No one would listen to me, and I had nowhere to go. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up and saw a kind-looking old man. "Hey, kid, I heard your story inside. I believe you. Here's some money for a hotel. Don't go home tonight. It isn't safe," he said while handing me a few $100s. "Wow, Thank you so much. This will really help." But before I could finish, he had walked away. I knew that there was a cheap hotel around the corner, so I just walked there and checked myself in. When I got to my room, I locked the door. I sat on my bed and wondered what I should do next. That was when I remembered the video I posted. I got my phone out and saw that I had tons of messages from friends. "OMG, Oliver, how could they do that to you? Wow, I had no idea you were going through so much. Ollie, you're on TV." I turned on the television and sure enough, I was right there. My video was playing and even the reporters looked shocked. They didn't have the same reaction as the police and it seemed like people were finally beginning to believe me. I smiled and suddenly my phone rang. "Hello, is this Oliver? Please don't ask me how I got your number. My name is Robert Charles and I'm a scientist who specializes in cloning animals and humans. I'm sure this might come as a shock to you, but your sisters were not conceived naturally. Your mother's eggs were used, but after they were artificially inseminated, they were kept in a laboratory. Your mother pretended to be pregnant for 9 months and everyone believed she had given birth naturally, but that is a lie. In reality, you are their only real child, and I think this might be why your sisters are upset with you. They are jealous. Also, something may have gone wrong scientifically, which would explain your sister's new violent tendencies. For your sake, I have decided to go public with my research and the truth about this whole situation. Stay where you are until I do so," he said. My jaw dropped. On one hand, I was relieved to know why my sisters had changed all of a sudden. On the other hand, this was all way too spooky. I remained in my hotel room for a few days. Like he promised, the scientist went public with the truth. My sisters were taken to an institution so that they could be observed and studied for any abnormalities. My parents aren't too happy about it all, but at least I'm safe at home now.